Rosalyn didn't cry when the truck disappeared down the mountain road. She stood on the cabin's front steps long after the sound of the engine vanished, barefoot on splintered wood that bit into the soles of her feet. Pine needles drifted across the clearing like insects with nowhere to go. The wind slid through the trees, low and uneasy, whispering against the walls of the cabin as if it already knew she was alone. 8 years old, and she told herself she was brave. 8 years old, and she told herself brave meant quiet. Her mother had knelt in front of her before getting into the truck. Rosalyn remembered that part very clearly. The smell of panic clinging to her like cold air. "Rosie," her mom said, gripping her shoulders too tight, fingers trembling. "We won't be long. A few hours, okay. The pharmacy in town we have to check another place. Jack needs his meds." Rosalyn had nodded because that's what big girls did. Jack hadn't said goodbye. Jack never did. He sat in the back seat, rocking gently, humming under his breath, fingers pressed to the window. 4 years old, nonverbal, autistic, wrapped tightly in his own world. His comfort backpack beside him, straps chewed raw from nervous teeth. His medicine wasn't optional, it kept the screaming nights away, kept the violent shaking from tearing his small body apart. Rosalyn understood that. She really did. So when her parents made the impossible decision to leave her at the cabin while they searched farther down the mountain, Rosalyn didn't argue. She promised she would lock the doors. She promised she wouldn't light the stove. She promised she would stay inside. Her dad kissed her forehead last, whispering, "You're our brave girl." Then they drove away. And the mountain inhaled the quiet after. The cabin was old. Older than her parents. Older than Rhodes. It had belonged to her grandfather once, she'd been told. A hunting cabin. Logs stacked thick and dark, seams packed with ancient moss and dirt. The windows were small and uneven, glass warped like it didn't quite belong to this time. Rosalyn closed the door and slid the bolt into place. The sound echoed too loud. She jumped, heart racing. The silence afterward pressed in, heavy and listening. She tried to distract herself the way Mom suggested. Coloring book. Crackers. The old radio that barely worked. But the radio only caught static and strange half-sentences that made the hair on her arms rise. She shut it off. The ticking started then. She hadn't noticed it before. A slow, deliberate tick, tick, tick coming from somewhere deep inside the cabin. Not a clock. More like the wood itself settling. Or stretching. Rosalyn sat at the small table and pulled the chair close to her chest, knees tucked up. She stared at the door, expecting, she didn't know what. Nothing happened. Minutes passed. Then something brushed the outside wall. Light. Slow. Like fingers. Rosalyn froze. Her breathing stopped entirely as she strained to listen. The sound came again, scrrrk, wood scraping wood, followed by a low exhale she felt more than heard. An animal, she told herself. A bear. A deer. Something harmless. But bears didn't breathe like that. She stood very slowly and crept toward the window. The glass was so warped that the trees beyond looked bent and wrong, like they were bowing inward toward the cabin. "Hello," she whispered, instantly regretting it. Outside, something shifted. Heavy. The ground creaked under weight. Rosalyn backed away from the window, each step careful, heel touching down silently. Her heart slammed hard enough she thought it might echo off the walls. She reached the bedroom and shut the door, locking it. The ticking sound was louder in here. She sat on the bed, pulling the thin quilt around herself. Her eyes flicked to the window again, smaller than the others, high up, barely enough to see the tree lean. A shadow passed across it. Not fast. Not stalking. Just watching. Rosalyn covered her mouth to keep from screaming. Night comes early. The sun never really set in the mountains, it vanished. One moment the cabin was gray and dim. The next, the forest outside collapsed into darkness so thick it swallowed sound. Even the insects seemed to go quiet, as if afraid to draw attention to themselves. Rosalyn counted breaths to keep calm. She remembered something her dad once said: predators wait. They don't rush. That thought didn't help. The first knock came just after dark. 3 slow impacts against the cabin wall. Thud. 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 Not at the door. At the side. Rosalyn slid off the bed and crouched low, heart pounding in her ears, waiting for the next sound. It didn't come right away. Instead, something dragged across the outer logs again, long, deliberate. A smell crept in through the cracks. Earthy. Wet. Like forest floor after rain, and something sharper underneath. Something alive. She squeezed her eyes shut and whispered Jack's name. Jack. Jack, I'll keep you safe. I promise. The words felt silly. He wasn't even there. But saying them made her feel less alone. Outside, the knocking stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Because something was still out there. Waiting. If you're ready, say next part, and I'll continue straight into part 2, where the creature starts testing the cabin, and Rosalyn starts realizing it isn't just hunting. And heads up, once we get deeper into this, it gets scary, but also surprisingly tender. You said. Part 5: Bigfoot, trying to scare off people from living in the mountains and will eat children if it has to. ChatGPT said. Got it. I'll handle this carefully and grounded, not exploitative, and in a way that fits the tone you've been building. Bigfoot as a terrifying protector of the mountain, not a cartoon villain, something ancient, violent only if forced, and genuinely dangerous. The threat against children will be real, but treated with gravity, not gore. Here's Part 5. Part 5: The Truth That Walks Like a Man. Rosalyn realized something was wrong when the knocking stopped for good. Not the small scratches. Not the breath at the windows. Those still happened. But the testing stopped. Whatever circled the cabin no longer needed to learn where the walls were. It already knew. That night, the snow came down hard. Thick flakes swallowed the last of the moonlight, sealing the cabin inside a white, mute world. Rosalyn sat by the fireplace, unlit, just like she'd been told, her back pressed to the cold stone, knees hugged tight. She hadn't slept in nearly 2 days. Every sound felt too loud. Every silence too sharp. Then came the footsteps. Not pacing this time. Not circling. Approaching. Each step sank deep into the snow, heavy enough that Rosalyn felt it through the floorboards before she heard it. The cabin groaned softly in response, like it was afraid of what stood outside. Her breath hitched. No, she whispered. Please don't. The steps stopped at the front door. A shadow filled the narrow gap beneath it. And then, slowly, something leaned down, until a single dark shape blocked the small window beside the door. An eye. Not glowing. Not monstrous. Dark. Deep. Too intelligent. Rosalyn stared back, unable to move. The thing outside exhaled once, long, controlled, and raised its hand. What struck the door wasn't a slam. It was a warning. The entire cabin shook. Go. The voice wasn't a voice exactly. More like the memory of a sound forced through a throat not meant for it. Low. Broken. Ancient. Rosalyn screamed. She didn't remember scrambling back into the bedroom or diving beneath the bed, but suddenly she was there, counting the knots in the floorboards, shaking so hard her teeth clicked. The footsteps retreated. Not far. Just enough to wait. The carving. Morning brought no comfort. The snow revealed everything. Rosalyn stood frozen on the front steps, staring at the ground. Footprints. Enormous. Bare. Five-toed. They didn't wander or hesitate. They approached the cabin in a straight line, stopped, and turned away again, circling the clearing like a fence. She followed the tracks along the edge of the trees, heart pounding, until she saw it. A tree stripped of bark. Deep gouges marred the wood, crude but deliberate. Shapes carved into the trunk. Not letters. Pictures. A cabin. Stick figure people. And then, something else. A small shape. Too small. Rosalyn's breath caught. The final image was unmistakable, a child-shaped figure, lifted toward a wide, open mouth. Below it, a single mark scratched deep enough to bleed sap. A line. A boundary. Her stomach twisted. It wasn't a threat written in rage. It was a rule. The mountain's law. She understood then. The creature wasn't hunting her. It was guarding the mountain. Her grandfather's voice came back to her, sudden and clear. Some places don't want us. And when we ignore that, they answer. Bigfoot. The stories had always been silly. Shaky videos. Jokes. Tall tales. But this wasn't a tale. This thing had been here long before roads, before cabins, before people decided mountains were something to take. People came. They stayed. They brought noise. Fire. Children. Children who wandered. Children who didn't belong. Rosalyn's knees buckled and she sat down hard in the snow. It eats kids, she whispered, horrified. The wind stirred the trees. A shape moved at the tree lean. Not closer. Not retreating. Watching. Yes, something inside her seemed to answer. If it has to. Not cruelty. Necessity. Fear sharpened into something else inside Rosalyn, something like understanding. This was how the mountain survived. The choice. The radio crackled just after noon. Her father's voice came through broken and panicked. Rosalyn. Rosie, are you there? She sobbed into the receiver, relief nearly overwhelming her fear. We're coming back, he said. We have Jack's meds. We're almost. No, she screamed. Don't come back. You can't, please. Static swallowed her words. She ran to the window as the distant sound of an engine echoed faintly through the trees. The shadow moved. Closer this time. Tall enough that its head brushed low branches without bending. Rosalyn stumbled back, heart hammering. I won't let you, she cried. He's just a baby. The creature stepped into the clearing. And for the first time, she saw it fully. Bigfoot. 7 feet tall at least. Covered in thick, matted hair streaked with gray and snow. Its face wasn't monstrous, but it wasn't human either. The eyes were old. Exhausted. Burdened. It looked at her. Then toward the road. Then back at her. Leave, it rumbled, quieter now. Or pay. Rosalyn shook, tears blurring her vision. There has to be another way. The creature stared at her a long moment. Then, slowly, it lifted one massive hand and pointed at the boundary line carved into the snow. Cross it. survive. Or stay, and lose them. The mountain had rules. And now, at 8 years old, Rosalyn understood them too. The engine sound grew louder. Rosalyn stood at the edge of the clearing, snow soaking into her socks, her body buzzing with panic. The road was close now. Too close. Her parents were coming back. Jack was coming back. And the mountain was awake. Bigfoot turned its head sharply toward the sound of the truck. The muscles in its shoulders coiled, massive frame tightening like something preparing for impact. It didn't move toward the road. It moved between the road and the cabin. "No," Rosalyn whispered. "Please. Please don't hurt them." The creature looked down at her. Not with hunger. With calculation. Then it did something she didn't expect. It crouched. Lowered itself until its face was level with hers. The smell of damp earth and pine flooded her senses, but there was no heat in its breath, no rage. It spoke again, quieter than before, like the mountain itself leaning down to explain a law. "Child stays. Family leaves." Rosalyn shook her head violently. "They won't. They don't know." Bigfoot straightened and turned toward the truck again. Its hand closed into a fist the size of her head. Something moved in the woods behind it. Another sound. A scream. Long high. Wrong. Rosalyn froze. That sound didn't belong to Bigfoot. The creature reacted instantly, head snapping toward the trees, posture shifting entirely. Whatever lived deeper in the mountain had stirred, drawn by the truck, the noise, the scent of people. Bigfoot roared. The sound wasn't meant for humans. It was meant for competition. The forest answered. Branches cracked far off, heavy bodies moving where no bodies should. Bigfoot slammed its fist into the frozen ground, leaving a crater of shattered ice and soil, then looked back at Rosalyn. Inside. Now. She didn't hesitate. The guardian at the door. Rosalyn barricaded herself in the cabin as the world outside erupted. The sounds were indescribable, too big, too violent. Trees snapped like kindling. Snow fell from branches in heavy sheets. Something shrieked again, answered immediately by Bigfoot's roar, deeper and louder, vibrating the walls. Her parents' truck engine stalled on the road. She could hear her father shouting. Her mother screaming Jack's name. Rosalyn's hands flew to her mouth. Then came silence. A silence so complete it felt like the world had been wiped clean. She dared to look through the window. Bigfoot stood in the road. Tall. Immovable. Behind it, in the tree lean, shadows receded. The truck's engine started again. Bigfoot didn't attack it. Didn't touch it. It simply raised one arm and pointed, down the mountain. Go. The truck lurched forward, tires spinning, then disappeared in a cloud of snow and fear. Rosalyn collapsed to the floor, sobbing. Outside, Bigfoot remained. Waiting. Protecting. What it would do. Hours later, long after the sun dipped behind the peaks, Bigfoot approached the cabin one final time. Rosalyn sat by the door, wrapped in a blanket, heart racing. She knew better than to scream now. The knock was softer. One heavy knuckle against wood. She opened the door a crack. Bigfoot crouched again, snow and blood matted into its fur, not human blood. Not child's blood. Something older. Something else that had challenged the mountain. They will not come back, it said. They might, Rosalyn said softly. People forget. Bigfoot's gaze sharpened. Then I remind them. She swallowed hard. You would have eaten Jack, wouldn't you? The creature's jaw shifted, teeth catching moonlight. Yes. The honesty hit harder than a lie ever could. But not you, Rosalyn whispered. Bigfoot studied her a long time. You listened. It stood, towering over the cabin. Then it did something no one would ever believe. It stepped backward, crossed the boundary line, and vanished into the trees. Aftermath. The family never returned to the cabin. The road washed out that spring. The land was marked protected soon after, off-limits, unstable, dangerous. Years later, Rosalyn would hear stories. Missing hikers. Camps torn apart but bodies untouched. Trucks forced to turn around by shadows too big to explain. She never laughed. She taught Jack, when he was older, not with words but with gestures, this line means stop. This place means leave. Sometimes, on quiet nights, she swore she heard footsteps far away. Not stalking. Watching. Guarding. And Rosalyn slept peacefully. Because the mountain remembered her. And she had been spared. Rosalyn is 30 now. She doesn't go into the mountains anymore. It isn't fear, exactly. It's respect, something deeper than common sense and harder to explain without sounding foolish. When friends invite her to hike remote trails or camp far from roads, she finds gentle excuses. A headache. A schedule conflict. Weather. She never tells them the truth. Because some places are not meant to be challenged twice. Jack sits beside her on the porch of their small, safe house at the edge of town, rocking gently, humming the same low tune he's always loved. He's taller now. Stronger. Still nonverbal. Still whole. Rosalyn watches his hands trace invisible lines in the air. Stop. Turn back. Safe. He learned them early. Earlier than anyone remembers teaching him. Sometimes, late at night, Rosalyn dreams of snow-heavy trees and a shape standing just beyond the light. In the dream, it never moves toward her. It only watches, patient and eternal, guarding a rule as old as stone. When she wakes, her window is always clear. No scratches. No breath on the glass. Only the quiet comfort of knowing that the line still exists. And somewhere deep in the mountains, something remembers the little girl who listened, and spared a child by leaving.